The year was 1428. The blood of the Dauphin's army stained the soil of France, and the Siege of Orléans had stretched the forces of both the English and the French to the breaking point. Elara of Picardy, 30 years old and hardened by 15 years of endless campaigning, adjusted the grip on her battle-axe. She stood atop the wooden palisades of the Bastille Tourelle, the cold mist of the Loire River clinging to her mail. To her comrades she was the Iron Lily, a title earned by her resilience and the uncanny grace with which she cleaved through enemy lines. Her face, usually stern, was marred by a thin scar running from her temple to her jaw, a souvenir from the Siege of Harfleur. She was more than just a soldier. She was a veteran commander, her intelligence as sharp as her axe blade. Below, the English camp sprawled like a festering wound on the French landscape. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed men, wood smoke, and the metallic tang of fear. "They move the culverins again, Elara," muttered Jean, her oldest lieutenant, a man whose face was perpetually shaded by the rim of his helmet. Elara squinted. The English were dragging their smaller cannons, the culverins, into a new position. They aimed to breach the western wall by dawn. "Tell Captain Mark to reinforce the merlins with every spare plank, and ready the barrels of burning pitch. Let them taste fire if they come that way." She ran her hand over the cold steel of her axe. The price of vigilance is constant exhaustion. She swept her gaze across the enemy positions, her focus professional, ruthless. Then, her eyes settled on a figure across the river, Sir Alaric of Warwick. Alaric was a man built for command, tall and imposing even from this distance. He was not merely a brute. She knew his mind was sharp, his tactics daring. She had faced him directly twice, once during a skirmish in the fields near Patay, and again during a retreat near Rouen. Each time, the clash of their weapons had felt less like combat, and more like a desperate, violent conversation. The thought of him brought an unwelcome warmth to the pit of her stomach, a heat that had nothing to do with battle fever. He is the enemy, a commander, the very embodiment of the crown I swore to crush. Later that night, the French forces launched a desperate tactical sortie to sabotage the English siege works. Elara, clad in blackened practical armor, led the main thrust. The clash was immediate and brutal. The night air filled with the sickening crunch of maces meeting bone, the tearing sound of longbow arrows embedding in flesh, and the wet, hollow thud of a cannonball exploding a nearby supply wagon, sending splinters of wood and chunks of human remains flying into the mud. Elara moved through the chaos with a terrifying economy of motion. Her axe rose and fell, efficient and deadly. A man charged her with a pike. She sidestepped the thrust, brought the axe down, splitting his helmet and skull with a sound like a wet log cracking. She didn't pause to look. Suddenly she was face to face with Alaric. He had been cutting down 3 Frenchmen simultaneously, his sword a silver blur. He saw her, and for a fraction of a second, the cold professionalism in his eyes fractured, replaced by a dark, intense recognition. "Elara!" His voice was a low growl, barely audible over the din of battle. "Alaric," she replied, her breath ragged. They met not with the clumsy fury of soldiers, but with the precise, practiced violence of duelists who knew each other's every move. Steel rang against steel, the blows heavy and searching. Her axe grazed his shoulder plate, his sword sliced the leather securing her pauldron. A detachment of English archers turned their attention toward them. Alaric, seeing the danger, shoved a struggling French soldier into the path of an incoming volley. He grabbed Elara's wrist, pulling her violently into the shadow of a damaged catapult. "You should not be here," he whispered, pressing her back against the wet timber. His body was a wall of heated steel against hers. "Nor should you," she retorted, the adrenaline making her body tremble. "Your siege works are burning." He ignored the taunt. His eyes were wide, dark pools reflecting the distant fires. "I saw you fall, near Rouen. I thought you were dead." "And you mourned the loss of a worthy adversary?" she challenged, her heart hammering against her ribs. "No," he said, the denial stark and utterly genuine. "I mourned something else entirely." The raw honesty of his words was more disarming than any battlefield maneuver. The urgency of the moment, the knowledge that either side could plunge a dagger into the other, fused with a terrifying need. He leaned in, crushing his mouth against hers. It was a kiss of violence and desperation, tasting of sweat, smoke, and the iron tang of blood, a communion of souls defined by the war they waged. He gripped her face, pulling her deeper into the kiss until she gasped, the air thin in her lungs. A sudden flare of torches indicated that more soldiers were approaching. He pulled back, his breath heavy, his voice thick. "Midnight, 3 days hence, the ruined chapel west of the river. Come alone, or I will kill you myself, Elara." He didn't wait for her answer. He plunged back into the fight, his movements sharper, more lethal than before, perhaps spurred by the very sin he had just committed. Elara watched him go, tasting his fear and her own on her lips. She adjusted her grip on the axe and rejoined her own troops, the desperate heat of the kiss warring with the cold clarity of her sworn oath. The secret forbidden love had been sealed in fire and blood. The next 2 days passed in a haze of internal conflict and desperate duty. Elara commanded the repairs of the northern battery, overseeing men who moved with the slow, aching movements of the starved and the exhausted. Every command felt hollow, every successful defense against the English archers, who felled 2 men with accurate bodkin arrows near her position, felt like a lie. She could barely look Jean, her lieutenant, in the eye. Jean, who had fought beside her since she was a girl with more courage than sense, trusted her implicitly. How can I lead them when I carry treason in my heart? That afternoon, a messenger arrived, bloodied and breathless, reporting that the English had introduced a new weapon, a small mobile hand cannon or pistol, inaccurate but terrifyingly loud, used primarily to scatter troops at close range during skirmishes. He showed Elara a deep burn and laceration on his thigh, where a shot had grazed him. The war was constantly evolving, constantly demanding more pain. She spent the long, cold hours before the clandestine meeting walking the ramparts, running her hands over the stone, trying to feel the solid ground of her commitment to France. But all she felt was the ghost of Alaric's demanding hand on her face, the rough wool of his surcoat, the promise of warmth amidst the endless cold. The very act of cleaning the dried blood from her axe felt like preparation for another kind of sin, another kind of battle. If I go, I betray my vow. If I don't go, I betray the only peace I have found since Verneuil. She knew the answer was already decided. The veteran was overriding the commander. 3 nights later, the chapel of Saint-Gilles was a skeletal ruin, bombed into silence months ago by the English bombards. Only the sturdy stone foundation and a partial apse remained, offering a precarious roof of broken timber. Elara arrived first. She wore heavy peasant clothes over minimal leather armor, her axe replaced by a serviceable short sword tucked into her belt. The river mist was thicker tonight, muffling the distant sounds of war until they were mere echoes. She didn't wait long. A shadow detached itself from the gloom of the nearby woods. Alaric. He was similarly disguised, though his movements retained the unmistakable precision of a trained warrior. "You came," he stated, stepping into the dim light filtering from the sliver of the moon. "I am a fool who honors a dangerous bargain," she admitted, her voice low. "Tell me your intent, Alaric. Is this a trap? Do you seek to use me for intelligence?" His expression was pained. "You insult us both, Elara. We are French and English, commander and veteran. We are enemies sworn to destroy each other. I could not sleep for 3 nights for the fear that you would be killed before I saw you again." He took a slow, deliberate step closer. "I need to know why I cannot hate you." He reached out, his gloved hand tracing the scar on her face. His touch was reverent, a stark contrast to the rough demands of the war they lived. "It is the war," Elara whispered, tilting her head into his touch. "The war has stripped away everything else. It has left us only this truth, that you and I are still capable of feeling." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her into the warmth of his body. "This feeling is treason, Elara. Treason to King Henry, treason to your Dauphin. We are worse than traitors. We are sinners." "Then let us sin completely," she murmured, the rational soldier giving way to the woman starved for human connection. They did not speak of strategies, of troop movements, or of the Dauphin's dwindling supplies. The air filled with heavy silence, punctuated only by their ragged breathing and the distant dull boom of an English mortar. They shed their heavy outer garments, the metal and leather falling onto the cold stones. Their bodies were maps of the war. Scars crisscrossed Elara's back and shoulders, the swipe of a halberd, the impact of a spent arquebus shot, while Alaric bore older, deeper wounds, the remnants of siege ladders and shattered shields. They came together with a raw, desperate intensity, seeking refuge not just in physical connection, but in the profound, temporary peace of unity. Their movements were a desperate seeking, a silent affirmation that despite the blood they shed daily, they were still human, still capable of tenderness. There was no thought of ownership or conquest, only the mutual, urgent need to forget the war for one stolen hour. The intensity of their lovemaking was the intensity of their danger, the fierce need to be whole in this moment, before they returned to a world trying to tear them apart. It was a release of the immense pressure built by the constant threat of death. They were 2 broken soldiers finding a momentary truce in the ruins of a destroyed sanctuary. Exhausted, they lay entwined, the cold stone of the chapel floor under the woolen blanket they shared, their bodies radiating a shared heat. "My wife," Alaric began, his voice barely a breath against her hair. "She died of a fever 3 years ago. I thought I would never feel this way again." Elara stroked his cheek, her hand tracing the exhaustion around his eyes. "I lost my family to the root at Verneuil. I have not grieved. The war does not allow it. It only allows this. What are we doing, Elara? When this siege ends, one of us will lose everything. Then let us be reckless, Alaric," she said, her tone suddenly firm, the soldier returning. "You will return to your camp, and I to mine. We will lead our forces, and we will fight with honor. But for these few hours, We are just man and woman, defined only by this need. Before dawn, they exchanged no intelligence, no promises of surrender, only a silent, lingering kiss that felt like a final farewell. They dressed in silence, the weight of their armor and their respective allegiances settling heavily upon them once more. The dawn of the 5th day brought no relief. The English cannons had finally breached the western wall, turning the stone into a mountain of rubble. The battle for Orléans had reached its terrible climax. Elara stood on the ramparts, organizing the defense. The air screamed with the sound of incoming handguns and crossbolt volleys. A French cannoneer next to her misjudged the fuse on a small swivel Petorero cannon. The weapon recoiled violently, smashing the gunner's chest plate inward and killing him instantly. Suddenly, a massive serpentine cannon exploded just 50 paces from her position. The concussion threw her backward, ringing her ears. When she staggered up, the air was misty with pulverized stone and blood. A French boy soldier lay nearby, his entire chest cavity opened by shrapnel, his lifeless eyes staring at the smoky sky. "Hold the line! Protect the breach!" Elara roared, shaking off the trauma. The English poured through the breach. Elara led a countercharge, her axe working tirelessly. The fighting was hand-to-hand, brutal medieval butchery. She saw a large man wielding a flail, the spiked head tearing a massive strip of flesh from the leg of a French knight. Another English soldier, hit squarely in the helmet by a crossbow bolt, pitched forward, his neck twisted at an impossible angle. Then, through the mayhem, she saw him. Alaric. He was leading a shock detachment, his banner held high. Their eyes met across the chaos, a terrible understanding passing between them. He was focused on the objective. She was focused on the defense. They were on a collision course. "For the Dauphin!" she screamed, charging toward the largest concentration of English forces, knowing Alaric would be there. They met in the thick of the breach. There were no words, only the deafening clang of steel. Alaric's sword was a disciplined weapon, her axe, raw power. Their movements, once a deadly dance of desire, were now a dance of necessary destruction. He blocked a descending blow from her axe, the force jarring his arm. "Yield, Elara, this city is lost." "Never!" she spat, sweeping her axe low, forcing him to leap back. A French soldier, seeing Alaric as a priority target, aimed a handgun at the English knight. Elara, operating purely on instinct, brought her axe down, not on Alaric, but on the soldier's gun arm, shattering the forearm with a sickening snap. The soldier screamed, dropping the weapon. The moment of betrayal was swift, observed only by Alaric. He used her pause to his advantage, driving his shield into her midsection, knocking the wind out of her. She stumbled back onto the slippery rubble, her head hitting a piece of broken stone. When Elara opened her eyes, the noise of the battle was muted, distant. Her head throbbed. She was lying near the breach. A shadow loomed over her. Alaric. He had his sword raised, but he was facing away from her, defending her body from the English soldiers who surged past. He was fighting his own men. "Sir Alaric, what are you doing? Finish her," bellowed an English captain. "She is mine!" Alaric roared back, his voice thick with a rage she had never heard. "She is a captive of Warwick. Advance, leave her." The English forces, desperate to push into the city, obeyed their commander. When they were alone in the relative quiet of the rubble pile, Alaric dropped to his knees beside her. "What you did," he said, his eyes burning with an unreadable mix of fury and gratitude. "You saved my life." "I saved myself the agony of watching you die," she corrected, pushing herself up, feeling the pain in her ribs. "It changes nothing. I still fight for France." Alaric reached into his surcoat and pulled out a rolled parchment, the English battle plan for the next phase of the siege, detailing the deployment of a new battery of sakers, medium-sized cannons, aimed at the cathedral. "The siege is lost, Elara, but your people need time. Use this. Buy them 2 days," he said, pressing the document into her hand. "But know this. I cannot return to the camp, not after that. I will be branded a traitor to my king. And I, by taking this, am a traitor to my cause," she whispered, realizing the depth of their mutual sacrifice. "We traded our honor for our survival," Alaric said, the truth heavy between them. He kissed her forehead one last time. "Go. Live. I will disappear into the forest. Find me when the war is done, Elara. Find me, or never speak my name again." He turned and melted into the smoke and fog, disappearing into the ravaged landscape. Elara clutched the document. The sounds of the battle were receding. The tide of the war had shifted, but their fate was sealed. She had the intelligence to save Orléans, but she had lost her place in the world, trading her sworn loyalty for a secret forbidden love. She knew she would use the plan, save her city, and live as a traitor, forever marked by the ultimate treason, loving the enemy. She rose slowly, adjusting her mail, and walked toward the heart of the besieged city, a deserter with a hero's secret.